Have you heard that the US is planning to punish yet another African country? And for what, you may ask? Simply to stick to its own culture and avoid becoming a victim of US cultural imperialism. The US thinks the African nations should not speak up and should follow whatever the US tells them. But does it make sense that African nations need to get the US's permission before passing a bill in Parliament? The US says, if Africa does that, it won't ever send aid to Africa. So what will Africa choose? The US's help or its cultural sovereignty? Let's find out. The United States has recently issued a stern warning to Ghana, signaling potential consequences for foreign aid if President Nana Akufo-Addo proceeds to sign a new bill criminalizing LGBTQI+ activities in the country. This development reflects the growing tension between international human rights standards and the sovereignty of individual nations to legislate on matters of societal values. The U.S. government's message suggests that imposing restrictions on foreign aid is a strategic tool to leverage influence and encourage adherence to international norms regarding human rights. But that raises many concerns, too. Does a nation like the United States, which is unable to provide equal rights to all races, have the right to talk about human rights? What happened in Gaza and the U.S. support to Israel, for that matter, makes the U.S. credible to talk about human rights. Some U.S. argue that foreign intervention may be necessary to safeguard fundamental rights and freedoms, but experts express reservations about external forces imposing their values on sovereign nations. What was the bill really about? What made the U.S. give Ghana a warning? This warning comes in response to Ghana's parliament passing legislation that intensifies the crackdown on LGBTQ rights. The bill in question imposes a prison sentence of up to 5 years for promoting LGBTQ+ activities. The legislation, which has triggered international concerns, aims to criminalize individuals identifying as LGBTQI+ and those who support them. The U.S. government's stance on this matter has been certain, and it has issued warnings of serious consequences if the anti-gay bill becomes law in Ghana. The warning emphasizes the need for Ghana to review the constitutionality of the bill to safeguard LGBTQ+ rights and prevent further discrimination within the nation. But why does the U.S. want Ghana to follow Western culture? According to the United States, its concern regarding Ghana's anti-LGBTQ+ bill is not about imposing Western culture, but rather about protecting the rights and freedoms of LGBTQ individuals. The U.S. government's stance is rooted in advocating for human rights and equality, rather than imposing cultural values. The concern raised by the U.S. is centered on safeguarding the rights of all individuals in Ghana, irrespective of their sexual orientation or gender identity, and ensuring that discriminatory laws do not undermine basic freedoms and societal well-being. But will other nations decide what culture a nation should follow, or should the locals do it? Instead of leaders from another country, or even leaders from Ghana deciding the rules, the local people should get to choose the laws themselves. Deciding whether other countries should dictate a nation's culture or the locals should decide is complicated. When it comes to Africa, it is tied to cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism happens when a powerful group forces its culture onto another community. This often occurs through political or economic dominance, leading the targeted population to adopt aspects of the dominant culture. This historical phenomenon is linked to military actions, where conquerors used laws, education, and force to impose their way of life on others. The debate on cultural imperialism raises concerns about power dynamics, autonomy, and preserving local cultures. While some argue that nations should be free to decide their cultural practices without outside interference, others point out the risks of dominant cultures eroding local traditions and identities. The idea of cultural imperialism has changed over time, with globalization and technology playing a significant role in how cultures interact. It seems reasonable to claim that local people should have the right to choose their own culture. Deciding on another nation's culture, especially by Western nations who may not fully understand the complexities of that culture, can be problematic. It raises the question of how outsiders can make informed decisions about a culture they might not comprehend well. Therefore, advocating for the locals to determine and preserve their cultural practices appears to be a more respectful and understanding approach. So, what do Ghana's locals have to say about LGBTQ? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Africa's geopolitics, economy, and changing landscape. Let's continue now. In Ghana, the local sentiment towards LGBTQ rights is generally unsupportive. The culture in Ghana does not align with LGBTQ rights, and a significant majority of the population holds negative views on the matter. A substantial 89% of Ghanaians express strong or somewhat disapproval towards individuals identifying as part of the LGBT community. This widespread disapproval is reflective of the prevailing cultural attitudes. Moreover, the Ghanaian government has publicly supported traditional values and beliefs that do not incorporate LGBTQ rights. This aligns with the broader cultural sentiment in the country, where there is a lack of acceptance and support for the LGBTQ community among the majority of the population. Should the locals be forced to change their sentiments just because the West says so? Whether locals should be compelled to change their sentiments because of external pressures, especially from the West, concerns cultural autonomy and the importance of respecting local traditions. Experts argue that cultural imperialism may weaken local cultures and the proliferation of Western ideals. This could pose a threat to cultural diversity and autonomy. Essentially, forcing changes in local sentiments without considering the unique cultural context may risk undermining the richness of cultural diversity and the autonomy of communities. Striking a balance between advocating for human rights and respecting cultural differences becomes essential in navigating these complex issues. If the locals are okay with this, why is the U.S. trying to make Ghana follow its order when passing a bill? The West is trying to do cultural imperialism. While it argues that it promotes values like tolerance and openness to change, Ghana sees it as a subtle form of cultural imperialism. Cultural imperialism, once closely associated with military intervention, has evolved in the modern era. It now involves more powerful nations exerting economic and political influence, with the United States being a notable player. Experts point to the spread of American culture through popular media, such as movies, music, and global fast food chains like McDonald's, as examples of this phenomenon. The concern lies in the potential homogenization of cultures and the erosion of unique local traditions in the face of dominant Western influences. Ghana finds itself at the crossroads of a global debate on cultural imperialism. The U.S.'s stance on LGBTQ rights reflects its commitment to universal equality, yet Ghanaians perceive it as a challenge to their traditions and values. This tension raises questions about the limits of foreign intervention in cultural matters and the potential consequences for diplomatic relations. The resilience of Ghanaian culture is not solely based on historical pride, but is also an example of the people's unwavering commitment to preserving their identity. The prospect of aid restrictions from the U.S. may seem daunting, but Ghanaians seem prepared to weather the storm in defense of their cultural autonomy. While the U.S. asserts its commitment to human rights globally, Ghanaians argue that cultural preservation is equally important. The potential restriction of aid, often a powerful diplomatic tool, may intensify the deadlock, leading to a re-evaluation of the balance between international cooperation and national sovereignty. This standoff is not merely about LGBTQ rights. It delves into the broader discourse of cultural preservation and the right of nations to determine their path. The U.S.'s attempts to influence Ghana's cultural landscape have encountered formidable resistance, sparking a larger conversation about the implications of such interventions. Let's discuss how the United States protects human rights within its borders. If it is giving a strong reaction if other nations fail to fulfill human rights, then it must be doing everything to save the rights of people within its borders. But that is far from the reality. Amnesty International's 2022 report on the United States raised some concerns. These included problems like hate crimes, gun violence, excessive force by the police, and violence against women. The report also talked about challenges due to court decisions affecting abortion rights and gun regulations. There were restrictions on sexual and reproductive rights after the overturning of Roe v. Wade by the U.S. Supreme Court. The report mentioned issues regarding the rights of refugees and migrants, such as mass immigration detention and the use of private prisons. There were also limitations on asylum access under programs like the Migrant Protection Protocol's MPP and Title 42 of the U.S. Code. The report highlighted worries about violence against indigenous women, restrictions on tribal governments prosecuting cases of sexual violence by non-indigenous people, and difficulties faced by LGBTI individuals, including attacks on healthcare protections. Even though the United States has promised to promote human rights globally and has participated in international human rights organizations like the UN Human Rights Council, there are still problems within its borders. The challenges in ensuring full human rights protection in the U.S. show an ongoing need for watchfulness, advocacy, and action to tackle systemic inequalities and safeguard the rights of everyone in the country. So, it is easy to talk about human rights and give lectures, but the U.S. fails to implement them. The U.S. that can't even implement all the advice for saving human rights in its territory has the right to control Ghana? What gives the U.S. the right to talk about human rights? Let us know in the comment section if the U.S. should even be taken seriously. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: African politics, economy, and increasing power. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.
Tell us what you think in the comment section. Like and share the video, and subscribe so that you don't miss any of our African videos. It's the best way to support us.